Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Loki. He got his highly anticipated Season 2 uniform and T4 upgrade. Unfortunately, the look for the uniform isn't the one that people were expecting. He got one from earlier episodes in the show and not the final look, which is really unfortunate because the final look just looks amazing. The visuals for the skills are probably the biggest letdown for this uniform, since they had so many great aesthetics to choose from the second season, and they didn't really incorporate too much of that into this uniform. I'm sort of hoping that they might do a synergy uniform so that he gets that final episode 6 look, or whichever the final episode was, and maybe incorporate some of those great visuals from that episode, as well as maybe some of the time skipping stuff before that. Aside from the visuals, the character got a really solid improvement, and his performance kind of feels like a seasonal uniform upgrade. The improvement isn't as drastic as a seasonal uniform because the character was already quite good before, specifically for the modes that he was used for, ABX and ABL. However, with this new uniform, he definitely does get an upgrade in those modes, and it allows him to perform much better in other things like World Boss Legend and also Giant Boss Raid. His usage in PvP is going to be limited, so I didn't really bother testing him there. His performance should be a little bit better than the President Loki uniform since he has longer iframes or more of them, and he has higher healing. However, if you do want to use him in Alliance Conquest, a CTP of Destruction would likely be a decent option, giving him burst and that penetration. Other than that, if you want to use him in the mid-level, then probably a CTP of Authority would be the most ideal option for that. As a heads up, all the testing that I did in PvE is done with a mighty CTP of Rage, but I don't have any Odins on the character, and there's definitely room for improvement in the build. For the first test, I took him into a stage 39 of Null without using a leadership or support, and with the mighty CTP of Rage, he was able to complete the first phase in that 2-minute window, meaning that he can complete this even without a leadership or support. But more importantly, since I found that a mighty destruction or a rage usually improves clear time by about 1 minute and 30 seconds to 2 minutes. If I didn't have that mighty rage and instead had a leadership and support, the character would more than likely be able to complete this stage without a damage proc. If not, the character would still be pretty close to completing it, which signifies how good this uniform is and how good the character is now in general. You can see that with a leadership and support added in, I'm able to go as high as stage 69 and still be able to complete the first phase in that 2-minute window. You can see that with the old TVA uniform, he isn't significantly worse, but with that, I wasn't able to complete the first phase in the 2-minute window, which means that the character wouldn't have been able to complete this stage outright. The other thing to note is that this uniform is tougher to use than the new one because it doesn't have as many iframes or as much healing, meaning that you do really have to pay attention to where you are so that you don't take too much damage and end up dying. To see how high I could push the character before needing a level 80 to go further, I took him to a stage 79, but I was slow by about 15 seconds in the first phase to be able to complete this stage. I'm not entirely sure if he would be able to do this with a mighty energy or destruction. I don't really know how it stacks up versus a rage. It is possible to use those CTPs since the character only really needs to delay cancel the 3rd skill, and for the most part you can even just outright cancel the 6th skill to get the buffs off of it and not mess up your rotation. However, for the most part, if you're going to use the character for PvE, and specifically ABX and ABL, it's going to be significantly easier just to use a CTP of Rage, especially if you can reforge it, since you won't mess up your rotation, and like I mentioned before, the 6th skill can sometimes linger on, so if you have an energy or destruction, it'll mess up your rotation. It will for Rage as well, but at least you won't miss the proc. Like many other characters, when you get Loki to a level 80, you will notice a significant improvement, especially in World Boss Legend. With that level 80 upgrade, I was able to complete the first phase over 1 minute faster, and was able to complete the entire fight with about 1 minute and 40 seconds left. Because Loki is universal type, he doesn't get any penalties versus bosses like Mephisto who are blast, and in fact gets a damage increase versus them. The other good thing in this particular fight is that although Mephisto is very annoying with a lot of AoE effects, and Loki can sometimes be rooted in place with his own attacks, he does go into iframe a lot in his attacks and ends up kind of bouncing around Mephisto and usually avoiding a lot of the damage that comes with Mephisto's AoE effects. This is again another reason why this uniform is an improvement over the TVA one, since he is a lot easier to play, and because of that you can usually end up being more aggressive and end up doing more damage in a shorter period of time. That said, you can still end up dying. Ironically enough, I did actually die in the gore test because I was trying to be more aggressive and just complete the fight before he went into his telegraphed attacks that actually hit very hard and can obviously kill Loki. But you can see from this clip that I was pretty much done the fight entirely with about 40 seconds left. Two pieces of advice I can give for you to avoid dying like I did. One of them is you can use the co-op skill when you see the telegraphed attack that Gore does, usually the line attack or the circle attack. For the most part, that should make you immune for a split second, making you avoid any damage that you would normally take. One of the other things you can do is that if you're stuck in an animation and you're kind of out of range to cancel into another skill, one thing you can do is to use the second skill that usually has a wider range. That'll close the gap, and then because that skill has a somewhat decently long animation, you can just quickly go into the first skill, and that should usually allow you to cancel that skill kind of quickly and just run away and avoid any damage that you would normally take. So basically use the co-op skill strategically, or use the first skill to cancel out of long animations and use the second skill to close the gap if you're out of range for the first skill. You can see that at level 80 with that Mighty Rage and a leadership and support, that Loki is able to complete stage 24 of Gene with about 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. The reason that that is significant is because I mentioned before that a leadership and support usually takes off about 2 minutes from your clear time. So if the character just went in without a leadership and support and just had the Mighty Rage, he should still be able to clear this stage with almost no time left. Similarly, if I just got rid of the Mighty Rage, the character would still be able to complete this with just the leadership and support, which again signifies how good the uniform is and the character in general. I'm not really sure what to say about the T4. The stat increase isn't too significant, and the skill itself seems a little bit convoluted, or at least conflicting with the rest of his kit. It says that he gains additional damage and some healing when he takes hits, and some other nonsense about misdirections and kind of things that spawn. But for the most part, the character is just jumping around in iframes, so he's not really going to get hit. And you can't really tell when the T4 skill or the second part of it is actually active. So I can't really say how frequently the T4 skill is fully active or whether it's even working as intended. They should probably clear up the wording or just make the effect a lot easier to actually work with its kit. But regardless, it does have a noticeable difference in PvE content like World Boss Legend and ABX and ABL, as you'll see shortly. In terms of general strikers to use, for World Boss Legend you can go with characters like Thanos or Magneto, since they can reach T4 and give you a maxed out T4 skill as well. But for ABX and ABL, depending on whether you have a damage proc on these characters, Ghost Rider or Thor are usually the go-to there. If you paid close attention to the timer for these T4 clears, you'll notice that pretty much all of them are at least a minute faster, which is pretty standard for a T4 upgrade. So even if the skill isn't really working properly, it does seem to still provide the reasonable expected benefit that the T4 would give. The only stage that didn't have a minute improvement was versus the Dark Phoenix or Gene stage, this one, and that's mostly because of the many animations and phase changes that skew the timer. Even though Loki's T4 skill is overly convoluted and doesn't necessarily make sense with his kit, it does allow you to be more aggressive, specifically in world boss stages that have a lot of telegraphed attacks or those purple attacks, since you get that additional healing from the skill, and it allows you to keep attacking when you normally couldn't when you didn't have the T4 skill and would usually end up dying from the lack of healing. But with that T4 skill, you can end up attacking and just casting more skills in a shorter period of time, which really helps improve the clear time even more. Although Loki's performance in World Boss Legend is pretty solid, his usefulness in ABX and ABL is where the character is the most valuable. He is definitely meta in ABX and ABL and has all of the cancel effects for all the different seasons. The reason that Loki is so unique and powerful in this mode is because, unlike other characters that usually activate a skill and it just spawns on the map, Loki's 5th skill activates on top of specific villains and has little AoE around it. And the significance of this is that if if there are a lot of them and they're in close proximity to one another, specifically around the boss, then those attacks can end up layering and stacking up on top of one another and end up doing way more hits than they normally would do just by themselves. And if you know anything about ABX and ABL, it's very prone to having a higher score if you do a lot of hits, which Loki can uniquely do because he can do more hits than pretty much any other character in the game. Because Loki's damage and number of hits is based on the amount of mobs around the boss, it also means that the character is quite difficult to master in ABX and ABL. He does take a lot of practice to figure out what the most ideal rotation is at a specific time, so that you have the least downtime while also casting your 5th skill when the most amount of mobs are around the boss. You also have to practice canceling the 6th skill, I believe, which I think is the most ideal rotation for the character in this mode, so that the 6th skill doesn't end up lingering too long, messing up your rotation, and taking out those mobs that give you all those extra hits. You can see in this clip just how good the character is in ABX for the Universal Villain Day. I wasn't canceling the 6th skill and didn't have an optimal rotation whatsoever, but I was still able to score around 13.5 million with him. With the T4 upgrade, I was able to get about 1 million higher score, but funny enough, I did end up botching the last cancel effect, and again, I didn't have an ideal rotation whatsoever, yet I was still able to get 14.5 million, and if I had a more ideal one or practiced a bit more, I'm pretty sure I easily would have been able to get 15 million. You can see that the character is just as good in ABL, though he is a little bit trickier to use there, since you also have to keep in mind where you are on the map, your positioning, when those orbs drop, and also have to account for the ideal time for your rotation, and when that Odin's Might effect is active so that you get the most damage out of the skills that you use. I definitely didn't have the most ideal rotation or practice this much at all, but I was still able to score around 6 million, again without any Odins, and in this particular team setup I didn't have a CTP of Insight equipped to any characters either. You can actually see that in ABL, that T4 upgrade gave me about a 2 million improvement in score rather than the 1 million that I got from ABX, so it does seem to have a little bit of a greater impact in ABL versus ABX. The rotation that I used for Loki was to do a quick cancel of the 1st and 2nd skill, and then you do a 3 delay cancel of about a half second, or you'll see the animation show kind of the red timeline turn green. That's when you can end up canceling it. And then you do a 5 cancel 4. When you have your ultimate available, you have 2 options. You can either quick cancel it just to get the effects from it and just go into your regular rotation, or you can do a 6 and delay cancel and go back into your regular rotation. But for this one, you have to get a little bit lucky since the ultimate skill will linger on and go into your next activation of the Rage CTP. So you do have to get a little bit lucky, but if it does end up proccing a little bit later, then you won't have a problem and you can just go back into your regular rotation while also having the ultimate up. So it's usually just comes down to preference of whichever one you want to do, though canceling it I think is a little bit more consistent. Not canceling it has the chance for it to yield higher damage and perform better on the high end. The T4 you want to use whenever it's available, and ideally activated when you're standing around an AoE effect or something to potentially trigger its effect and get the additional damage out of it. I will say that Loki is definitely solid for Giant Boss Raid, but doesn't seem to be as OP as he should be. I'm guessing just because he can't utilize the 5th skill to his full effect to get just way more hits on the boss, and for that reason doesn't end up being at the very top of the universal character's performance in Giant Boss Raid. But regardless, if you already built him for ABX, ABL, then he'll have a ton of usage in World Boss Legend and should perform quite well in Giant Boss Raid regardless. The other benefit you get to building Loki for PvE with the CTP of Rage is that he is quite effective in Dispatch and Dimension Rifts because of that stacking attack or hits with the 5th skill, allowing him to clear mobs quite quickly. You can see that I was only about 7 seconds behind my Thor, though my Thor is way better built than my Loki. He has all Odins, has an Insight CTP on the team, and also has a Brilliant Rage. So if you kind of normalize the builds between the two characters, they should come out pretty close to one another. So you can clearly see that Loki is a great universal villain character, especially if you don't have any of the pricey seasonal uniforms such as for Thanos or Black Bolt, he is a great pickup there. And even if you just need a good universal character, then he is useful for a ton of PvE things like ABX and ABL, but also for World Boss Legend stages. Not too many of them, but he is good for that, and obviously Dispatch and Dimension Rifts. Overall, I'd say he's a great pickup and can function pretty well even at level 80, so you don't even absolutely need to get him to T4. You can get a ton of usage out of him even with a regular rage and him at level 80. Unfortunately, I didn't really have much time to make a video for Fury and Spectrum. Fury is mostly just going to be a support character anyway. Spectrum does actually have some decent usage in Alliance Conquest though, and I'll probably get some clips of her down the line that I can share. I'm more than likely going to be doing the live stream for the CTP chest opening tomorrow or Saturday. I'm not sure of the exact time yet, but I'll make an announcement on Discord, so make sure to follow me there. Might do one on YouTube as well, but I'm not too sure about that, so it's best just to join the Discord channel since usually I update most of the news with what's going on there. Anyways, that does it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, possibly even sharing it with others, since it not only helps them out, but it also helps my channel grow, and I can make more videos like this. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch this, but the video is now over.